15 years ago, Daniel Price vanished. No clues, no witnesses, just gone. But last year, he showed up again. Some mysteries should stay forgotten. The morning Daniel Price disappeared was bright and unremarkable. The sun cast long golden beams over the quiet neighborhood of Fairview, and the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and warm pavement. It was the kind of morning where nothing should have gone wrong. Daniel was playing in his front yard the way he always did. His mother, Ellen Price, stood by the kitchen window, rinsing breakfast plates while keeping an occasional eye on him. He was kicking a red rubber ball against the wooden fence, watching it bounce back toward him with each soft thud. 2 minutes. That's how long it took. Ellen glanced down to dry her hands, and when she looked back out the window, Daniel was gone. At first, she didn't panic. Maybe he had run to the backyard or dashed inside without her noticing. But the yard was silent. The ball sat motionless against the fence. Ellen called his name. Once, twice. Her voice cut through the still morning air, but no small voice answered back. The silence was wrong. It pressed in, thick and suffocating, the kind that shouldn't exist in a suburban street, where birds chirped and neighbors mowed their lawns. She checked the side of the house. The backyard, the driveway, nothing. By the time an hour passed, half the neighborhood had joined in the search. Daniel's father, Mark, rushed home from work. His voice, normally so steady, cracked as he shouted his son's name. The police were called. Officers combed through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking the same questions over and over. Did anyone see Daniel this morning? Did anyone see a car, a stranger? Did anyone see anything? No one had. No one had seen or heard a thing. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. The town of Fairview had never experienced anything like this. A missing child was the kind of tragedy that happened in big cities, in places far from their quiet, safe streets. The entire town came together. Volunteers spread out, searching the surrounding woods, abandoned houses, and drainage ditches. Helicopters flew overhead, sweeping the area with searchlights. Bloodhounds sniffed through the brush, picking up Daniel's scent near the fence, but nowhere beyond it, the scent just stopped, as if Daniel had ceased to exist right there. Detectives went through security footage from houses along the street. A retired couple across the road had a doorbell camera that faced the Price family's yard. It should have caught something. Instead, it recorded 2 minutes of static. It was the only footage that had been corrupted. The lead investigator, Detective Harper, ordered it to be analyzed by forensic techs. They found no signs of tampering, no signs of a malfunction. The footage simply didn't exist. Inside the Price home, everything was exactly as Daniel had left it. His breakfast sat on the table, half-eaten. His sneakers were still by the door. His favorite book, The Secret Garden, lay open on his bed, a dog-eared page marking where he had last stopped. The only thing missing was him. His mother refused to touch anything in his room. It remained frozen in time, a shrine to the boy who had vanished. Months passed. Leads dried up. The police exhausted every theory. A stranger snatching him in broad daylight? Impossible. There were no witnesses, no signs of struggle. Running away? Unlikely. He was 8 years old, and nothing in his life suggested he had a reason to leave. Some whispered darker theories. Something supernatural, something wrong. But in the end, no answers came. His parents moved away, unable to bear living in a house where their son had disappeared into thin air. And Fairview, despite its grief, moved on. Daniel Price became another small-town tragedy. Until, years later, his name resurfaced in the most impossible way. Susan Calloway had never met Daniel Price. She had moved to Fairview long after his disappearance, only vaguely aware of his story. He was a name people mentioned in hushed voices, a piece of the town's history that no one liked to dwell on. She hadn't thought about him at all until she found the yearbook. She was cleaning out her late mother's attic, sorting through dust-covered boxes when she stumbled upon it. Fairview High School, class of 2009. She flipped through the pages idly, not expecting anything unusual. Then she reached page 42 and froze. A classroom photo. Rows of students sitting at their desks, and there, staring straight ahead, was Daniel Price. Same name, same face, only older. Her mind reeled. It didn't make sense. Daniel Price had disappeared in 2008. He would have been 9 years old in 2009, but in this photo, he was a teenager. She shut the book, her heart hammering. It had to be a mistake, a misprint, a coincidence. But then she showed the yearbook to her brother Eric, who had attended Fairview High at that time. "Do you remember this kid?" she asked, pointing to the picture. Eric frowned, stared at the face. Then, suddenly, he went pale, his breathing hitched. His hand trembled as he shut the book. "I don't know," he muttered. I feel like I should, but—" He trailed off, pressing his fingers against his temple. Susan's stomach twisted. "You okay?" Eric shook his head. "I just got this weird feeling, like I should know him, but when I try to think about it, my head starts hurting." Susan felt a shiver creep up her spine. She showed the photo to more people from Fairview High. Some felt sick looking at it, others got headaches. One person burst into tears, unable to explain why. A missing child had appeared in a yearbook after he had disappeared, and somehow no one remembered him. Not until they were forced to. A few weeks later, a local store owner came forward with something even more unsettling: old security footage from 2015. The video showed customers coming and going, normal, routine, but near the entrance, a figure stood, motionless. He had been there for hours. No one spoke to him. No one even glanced in his direction, like he was invisible. They enhanced the footage, and there, clear as day, was Daniel Price, 15 years older, but still here, still waiting. Susan stared at the screen, her blood running cold. The realization settled over her like a suffocating weight. Daniel Price hadn't disappeared. The world had just stopped noticing him. Susan Calloway couldn't sleep. The yearbook sat on her desk, open to page 42, where Daniel Price's face stared back at her. She had flipped to that page so many times, half expecting his picture to vanish the next time she looked. But every time it was still there, solid, undeniable, impossible. Daniel Price had disappeared in 2008. The entire town had searched for him. His name had been on the news, his face on missing posters. He had been 8 years old. And yet, 1 year later, his older self was sitting in a classroom. She couldn't stop thinking about what her brother had said. "I should know him, but when I try to think about it, my head starts hurting." She reached for her phone, fingers shaking as she typed Daniel Price, Fairview 2008 into the search bar. Dozens of articles popped up. Missing, Fairview boy vanishes without a trace. Daniel Price, search suspended after months of no leads, no answers, in the disappearance of 8-year-old Daniel Price. She clicked on one of the links. A faded news report from May 18, 2008. Fairview police continue searching for 8-year-old Daniel Price, who was last seen playing outside his home on Willow Lane. Authorities have not ruled out foul play, but say there are no leads at this time. She scrolled further, a picture of him. The same face, the same wide green eyes looking back at her with quiet curiosity. She closed the tab. Then, with slow dread, she typed Fairview High Yearbook 2009 student list. Nothing. No articles, no mentions, no archived student records. It was like the class had never existed. Susan rubbed her temples, frustration bubbling under her skin. If he had been real, there would be something. She hesitated, then opened the Fairview High School website, scrolling through faculty contacts until she found a former librarian listed in the archives. Margaret Hewitt. Susan's hands were clammy as she picked up the phone and dialed the number. A groggy voice answered, "Hello? Ms. Hewitt? My name is Susan Calloway. I found something in an old yearbook and I was hoping you could help me. It's about a student from 2009. Silence. Then a cautious, "What student?" Susan's grip tightened on her phone. "Daniel Price." The line crackled. For a moment, Susan thought the call had dropped. Then Margaret inhaled sharply. "You shouldn't be asking about him." Susan's pulse skipped. "Why?" Another pause. Then, in a hushed voice, "Because I don't remember him." A chill slithered down Susan's spine. Margaret continued, her voice trembling. I I should. I was the librarian. I knew every student. But when you said his name just now, I felt something push back, like my brain won't let me think about him. Susan swallowed. I have a picture of him. He's right here in my yearbook. No, he isn't. Susan's stomach dropped. What? Margaret's voice was eerily calm. If you check again, he won't be there. Susan yanked the yearbook off the desk, flipping to page 42 so fast the paper nearly tore. Her breath caught in her throat. Daniel Price's picture was gone. Nothing but a blank white space. The book slipped from her hands. Margaret whispered, "You need to stop looking." The line went dead. Susan sat frozen, the yearbook lying open at her feet. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she picked it up again, running her fingers over the empty space where Daniel's face had been. Just hours ago, he had been there. Now it was as if the paper itself had never been printed with his image. She grabbed her phone, scrolling frantically through her camera roll. She had taken a picture of the yearbook earlier. She was sure of it. She scrolled and scrolled. The photo was gone. Everywhere she had saved it, her phone, her laptop, her cloud storage, all gone. It wasn't deleted. It was like it had never existed. Susan pressed her hands against her temples. This wasn't just a memory problem. It was something bigger. Something was actively removing Daniel Price from reality. But then, why could she still remember him? Why hadn't she forgotten? She grabbed a pen and a notebook, writing his name down in bold, shaky letters. Daniel Price, leased. She stared at the words, half expecting them to fade as she watched. They didn't. For now. Her hands were still shaking when her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Stop. She felt her breath hitch. Another message came through. You're not supposed to remember. A loud knock echoed from her front door. Susan's entire body went cold. Slow. Deliberate. Another knock. She forced herself to stand, heart hammering against her ribs. The air felt wrong, like something was on the other side of the door that shouldn't be. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the doorknob. Then her phone buzzed again. Another message. Don't open it. Susan's breath hitched. The knocks stopped. The silence stretched on. She waited. 5 minutes, 10. Then, with a trembling hand, she peeked through the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. But something caught her eye. A piece of paper slid under her door. She hesitated before picking it up, unfolding it carefully. There, in smeared black ink, was a message scrawled over and over, as if written in a panicked frenzy. I'm still here. Susan dropped the paper like it had burned her. Her vision swam, her head pounding as a realization hit her like a freight train. Daniel Price had never disappeared. Something, or someone, had made the world forget him. And now, whatever had done it, she remembered Susan didn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk, the dim glow of her lamp casting eerie shadows across the walls. The yearbook lay open in front of her, the blank space on page 42 mocking her. She ran her fingers over it, as if pressing hard enough could make Daniel Price reappear. The note still sat beside her. I'm still here. The ink was smudged, the letters frantic. It felt like a warning. Or a plea. Outside, the wind howled against her apartment window. The silence in her small living space was oppressive. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of her chair, felt magnified, unnatural. At some point, exhaustion took over. She fell asleep at her desk. And that's when the dream started. She was standing in a field. The air was still, heavy, thick. A low fog curled around her feet, clinging to her skin like static. In the distance, a figure stood with his back to her. Small, still. A child. She tried to call out, but no sound left her lips. The boy turned his head slightly, not enough for her to see his face, just enough to let her know he had heard her. Then, without moving, he was closer. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The boy took another step. His face was still obscured, like something was wrong with her vision, like her brain refused to fully process what she was seeing. He lifted his hand, fingers twitching as if reaching for her. Susan jerked awake. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her skin damp with sweat. For a moment, she was disoriented, lost in the fog of sleep. Then she heard it. A knock. Not from the front door. From inside her apartment, she froze. The sound had come from the closet. The air felt thick, suffocating. Her fingers curled around the edge of her desk, knuckles turning white. Another knock. Slow, deliberate. A scraping sound followed, like fingernails dragging across wood. Susan's mouth was dry. Her entire body screamed at her to move, to run, to get the hell out of the apartment, but she didn't. Because she wasn't sure she wanted to see what was on the other side of that door. Instead, she did the only thing she could think of. She whispered his name. Daniel? The scraping stopped. The silence was worse. Susan forced herself to stand, her knees shaking as she inched toward the closet. Her fingers hovered over the handle, every instinct begging her to stop. But she pulled the door open anyway. Nothing, just her clothes. Boxes, a stack of books. But something felt wrong, like the air had shifted somehow. She turned back to her desk, rubbing her temples, trying to push down the nausea creeping up her throat. Then she noticed something that hadn't been there before. The yearbook was closed, and sitting on top of it was a Polaroid photo. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't taken any pictures. Hands trembling, she picked it up. It was a photo of her, from behind, taken just moments ago, sitting at her desk, staring at the empty yearbook. Someone had been in the room with her, and she hadn't even noticed. Susan didn't go to work the next day. She couldn't focus. Couldn't pretend life was normal, not after last night. She spent the morning trying to track down old classmates from Fairview High, searching for anyone else who might remember Daniel Price. Most messages went unanswered. The few that did respond gave short, dismissive replies. I don't know who that is. You have the wrong person. Sorry, I don't remember that name. But something felt off about their responses. It wasn't just that they didn't remember him. It was that they didn't want to. Like their brains were blocking it out. She decided to try something else. She pulled up an old Fairview High yearbook PDF she had found online. It was for the class of 2010, the year after Daniel's supposed appearance in 2009. She scrolled through the pages, scanning every face, every name, but something was missing. There were gaps. Certain faces looked blurred, as if the image hadn't fully loaded. Some names were cut off, trailing into white space. The further she scrolled, the worse it got. By the last few pages, entire sections of students were just gone, as if someone had been removing them one by one. Her head throbbed. She slammed the laptop shut, her pulse pounding. This wasn't just about Daniel. This was happening to others. She had no proof, no way to prove what she had seen wasn't just a glitch or an error in the file, but she knew something or someone was erasing people. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Her stomach tightened. She hesitated, then answered. A deep, static-filled silence stretched on the other end. Then a whisper. They know what you're doing. Susan's breath hitched. The voice was low, distorted, barely human. You need to stop. Her mouth was dry. Who is this? A long pause. Then, in a softer voice, I'm still here. The call cut out. Susan stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Daniel, it had to be. But how? How was he calling her? Was he even real? She felt her hands tremble as she gripped the edges of her desk, struggling to breathe. Then she noticed her laptop screen had flickered back on. A new document was open. She hadn't opened it. There were 3 words typed across the blank page. Words that sent ice crawling through her veins. Don't look away. And beneath it, in the bottom corner, a live feed from her webcam. A figure stood behind her, watching. The screen flickered, the image distorted. Then, in the reflection of the dark monitor, Daniel Price was smiling. Susan slammed the laptop shut. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps, her fingers digging into the edge of her desk. She had seen his reflection, Daniel Price, standing right behind her, watching. Her body refused to move at first, paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming wrongness of what she had just witnessed. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, like something unseen was pressing against her skin. Slowly, too slowly, she turned her head. The room was empty, nothing behind her, nothing out of place, but she knew what she had seen. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, staring at the black screen for a long moment before forcing herself to dial a number. She wasn't even sure who she was calling. 911? A friend? The line rang once, twice, then the call dropped. No service. Susan's pulse pounded in her ears. Her Wi-Fi had been working fine minutes ago. She tried again. Call failed. Something wasn't right. She needed to leave. She grabbed her coat, shoving her phone into her pocket as she moved toward the door. Then, from behind her, a soft creak, like the shifting of weight on the wooden floor. Her breath hitched. It had come from inside the apartment. She wasn't alone. She spun around, heart hammering, and for a split second, just a fraction of a moment, she saw him. A boy, thin, pale, standing in the corner of the room, eyes locked on her. The light around him flickered, like he wasn't fully there, like her brain was struggling to register his presence. Then he blinked out of existence, like a candle blown out. Gone. Susan stumbled back against the door, her lungs squeezing painfully as she gasped for air. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her fingers against her temples. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But when she opened her eyes again, something else was wrong. The time on the clock had changed. When she had looked just moments ago, it had been 10:42 a.m. Now it was 3:17 p.m. She hadn't moved, hadn't blacked out, but somehow she had lost nearly 5 hours. Susan didn't leave her apartment. Not yet. She sat on her bed, arms wrapped around her knees, trying to process what was happening. Daniel Price had been in her home. Or had he? Was she losing her mind? She checked her phone again. Still no service. She opened her laptop. The screen was black. It wouldn't turn on. Every electronic device in her apartment was dead. Her lights flickered. Then the whispers started. Soft at first, barely audible, like someone was speaking from another room. She couldn't make out the words, just the sound of something there. She pressed her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. No, 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 the whispers grew louder, closer, surrounding her, until suddenly they stopped. Silence. Her ears rang in the absence of sound. She lowered her hands, blinking. Something felt different. The air smelled stale, like dust and old paper. The light filtering through her window seemed off, duller than it should have been. She stood slowly, moving toward the window, and when she looked outside, her stomach dropped. The street was empty. Not just quiet, empty. No people, no cars, no movement, like the world had simply stopped. She grabbed her phone again, desperately refreshing her signal. Nothing. Then, on the blank screen, a message appeared. A message that shouldn't have been possible. I told you to stop. Her breath caught. Then another message appeared. It's too late now. She dropped the phone. The sound it made against the floor felt distant, like it was happening in another room. Susan forced herself to take a deep breath. She needed to get out of here. She grabbed her keys and yanked open the apartment door and came face to face with a stranger. A man stood in the hallway, tall, dressed in dark clothing, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty, like something was missing inside of him. Miss Calloway, he said, his voice low and even. She took a step back. Who are you? The man didn't answer. Instead, he lifted something from his pocket, a photo. She didn't want to look. She shouldn't look. But she did. It was her, standing in front of her desk, looking at the empty yearbook, just like the Polaroid she had found. Her throat tightened. Her voice barely came out as a whisper. Where did you get that? The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. Then he said, You need to forget, Miss Calloway. Her pulse spiked. Forget! Her instinct screamed at her to run. She moved before she had time to think, slamming the door in his face and locking it. A second later, knock, soft, unhurried, then another, and another. The knocking wouldn't stop. Susan pressed her back against the door, her chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. She couldn't stay here. She had to find help. Find someone else who remembered. Her fingers fumbled over her phone, shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. And then she found it. A name. One she hadn't expected. Margaret Hewitt, the librarian. Susan didn't hesitate. She pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, then a click, a voice on the other end. But it wasn't Margaret. It was a child. A young boy's voice, soft and distant. You shouldn't be looking for me. The line went dead. Susan stared at the screen, her entire body cold. That voice. She knew that voice. Daniel Price had just answered the phone. Susan gripped her phone, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. You shouldn't be looking for me. The voice had been small, hollow. Daniel Price. He had answered Margaret Hewitt's phone, or something pretending to be him. She swallowed, forcing herself to dial again. The call rang twice, then voicemail. Margaret's voice came through, tinny and distant. Hi, you've reached Margaret Hewitt. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and... A sharp glitch interrupted the recording, distorting the words into an ear-splitting screech, then silence. Susan pulled the phone away from her ear, heart hammering. She had to get out of her apartment. She grabbed her bag and threw open the door, only to find the hallway was gone. Her apartment no longer led into the usual narrow hallway with its buzzing fluorescent lights. Instead, the doorway opened into nothing. A vast, empty void stretched before her. The world outside her apartment had vanished. She slammed the door shut, pressing her back against it. No, this wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing her breathing to slow. This wasn't real. It was a trick, a hallucination. She had to focus. She turned back toward her window, hesitating before peeling back the curtain, and gasped. The street was back. People walked along the sidewalk. Cars passed by. Everything looked normal. But something was off. She studied the pedestrians below. They moved like clockwork, each step measured, each motion too smooth. A woman walked past a mailbox, then looped back and walked past it again. A man across the street reached into his pocket, pulled out a phone, then did it again, the exact same way, like a repeating clip from a video. Susan's stomach twisted. The world was repeating itself, like a loop, like it was trying to reset. She grabbed her coat and keys. She had to leave before whatever was happening to the town happened to her, before she could forget herself. Susan drove through Fairview, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. She needed answers. Her first stop was the police station. Detective Harper had worked on Daniel's case 15 years ago. If anyone still had records of the investigation, it would be him. She pulled into the parking lot, hurried inside, and stepped up to the front desk. An officer glanced up. Can I help you? Susan took a breath. I need to speak with Detective Harper. It's about the Daniel Price case. The officer frowned. Who? Susan's blood ran cold. She swallowed. Detective Harper. He worked on the missing child case in 2008, Daniel Price. He vanished from Fairview? The officer's eyes darkened. Ma'am, there's no Detective Harper here, and we've never had a case like that. Susan shook her head. That's not possible. He was the lead investigator. The officer's face remained blank. No one by that name has ever worked here. Susan took a shaky step back. Detective Harper had been erased. Her hands trembled as she turned and walked out of the station. How many people had already disappeared? How much of Fairview had already been rewritten? She needed proof. Something the world couldn't erase. Susan drove to Fairview Public Library. If police records had been altered, then maybe, just maybe, physical archives had been left untouched. She stepped inside, scanning the rows of bookshelves until she reached the local history section. She ran her fingers along the spines of old newspaper archives, searching for the year Daniel disappeared. She found the right binder. She pulled it from the shelf, flipped to May, scanning for headlines, and her stomach dropped. The entire month was missing. Pages had been ripped out, not just Daniel's disappearance, everything. Susan's hands shook as she flipped forward. June, July, August. Every page was intact. Only May, the month Daniel vanished, was gone. A cold weight settled in her chest. Something wasn't just making people forget, it was rewriting history itself. And yet, she still remembered. She still knew his name. Why? She slammed the binder shut, gripping it like it might disappear if she let go. And then, a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here," Susan froze. Slowly she turned. A woman stood at the end of the aisle. Tall, dressed in black. Her face was blurry, like a smudged photograph. Susan's pulse spiked. She took a step back, clutching the archive to her chest. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head. "You've been noticing him too much." Susan's throat tightened. The woman took a step forward. "You need to forget." Susan turned and ran. She sprinted out of the library, the cold air slamming against her face as she burst outside. She jumped into her car, locking the doors, gasping for breath. The woman hadn't followed. But Susan knew she wasn't safe. Susan drove to the edge of town. She needed space, time to think. She pulled into an empty parking lot and gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady her breathing. She checked her phone. Still no service. She opened her notes app and typed, "Daniel Price exists." Daniel Price disappeared in 2008. Daniel Price was in a yearbook in 2009. She stared at the words, willing them to stay. Then her phone glitched. For a second, the screen distorted, flickering with static. When it cleared, her notes were blank. Her hands trembled as she typed again. "Daniel Price exists." The words vanished as she watched. She gritted her teeth, pressing the letters harder. They disappeared mid-sentence, like something was actively deleting them. Then her screen flickered. A message appeared. "Stop." Susan's breath caught. Then another message. "He sees you." She dropped the phone. Her reflection in the screen had changed. For a split second, she saw a second face behind hers, Daniel Price, smiling. And then he whispered, "You're next." The screen cut to black. The town of Fairview felt wrong. Susan had lived there for years, but now, as she drove through its quiet streets, it felt unfamiliar, like she had stepped into a distorted version of reality. Shops she remembered had changed overnight. Street signs looked off, as if the letters had been rearranged. The people walking along the sidewalks had blank expressions, their eyes unfocused, like puppets moving on a forgotten script. And worst of all, she felt like something was following her. She couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but she could feel it, a presence, just at the edge of her vision, watching, waiting. She needed answers, and there was only one place left to look: Daniel Price's childhood home. She turned onto Willow Lane, her hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to hurt. It was still there. The house sat at the end of the street, tucked away behind a row of trees. It had been abandoned for years. The once white siding was now faded and gray, the porch sagging from neglect. The windows were dark, empty. Daniel had disappeared from this yard, and now she was going in. The gate groaned as Susan pushed it open. Weeds curled through the cracks in the pavement, reclaiming the space. She hesitated at the porch steps, glancing around. The street was empty, too empty. She should have turned back, but she stepped forward. The front door was unlocked. The air inside was stale, thick with dust. The silence was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that listened. Susan moved carefully through the house. Daniel's room. She knew where it was. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps muffled against the old carpet. The walls were still lined with faded family photos, but the faces looked blurred, like something had erased them. Finally, she reached the last door on the left. Daniel's room. Her fingers hovered over the handle. Then, slowly, she pushed it open. The room was untouched. Dust clung to every surface, but nothing had been moved. A small bed, a wooden desk, bookshelves filled with children's mysteries and adventure novels, and on the desk, an open notebook. Susan's stomach twisted. She stepped forward, heart pounding as she looked down at the pages. There, written in Daniel's handwriting, over and over, "I am still here," hundreds of times, covering every inch of the paper. Her breath hitched. Some of the ink was fresh, as if someone had been writing in this notebook recently, as if Daniel Price had been here. She reached for the book, and the closet door creaked open. Susan froze. A shadow moved inside the closet, slow, silent. She couldn't breathe. Then, a whisper, right next to her ear. "You found me." She spun around. The room was empty, but she could still feel it. Something else was here, something unseen. Then she heard it, the soft sound of bare feet on carpet moving toward her. But there was nothing there. The air turned heavy, pressing against her chest, and then, for just a moment, she saw him. Daniel? He was flickering in and out of existence. One second he was there, a thin boy with pale skin standing in the doorway, his green eyes hollow, empty. The next he was gone. Not moving, not vanishing, just blinking in and out like a broken signal. Susan couldn't speak. Then his mouth moved. "You have to remember me." The words were wrong, stretched like a distant echo. "You're trying to erase me." Susan's knees nearly gave out. "Oh," she whispered. Daniel's form flickered again, his image distorting. Them. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the house. The only sound was her own breathing, and then a new sound, a voice, but it wasn't Daniel's. It was deeper, wrong. "You should not be here." Susan's heart stopped. Something else was in the room. She ran. She didn't care what was behind her. She bolted down the hallway, feet barely touching the floor as she reached the front door, only to find it shut, locked. She clawed at the handle, yanking and pulling. Something moved behind her. Slow footsteps. She didn't turn, couldn't turn. Then, a whisper, right against her ear. "Forget." She felt something touch her shoulder, and then everything went black. Susan woke up on the front lawn. The sky was dark. Hours had passed. Her head throbbed. Her mouth was dry. For a moment, she couldn't remember how she had gotten here. Then it all came rushing back. The house, the notebook, Daniel. She scrambled to her feet, spinning around. The house loomed before her. Oh, but something was wrong. The windows were gone. The door was gone. The house was seamless, empty, like it had never been lived in, like it had never been a house at all. Her stomach turned. She backed away slowly, forcing herself to breathe. She had to get away from here. She turned and stopped dead. A man stood by her car, tall, dressed in black, the same man from before, the one with the empty eyes. She took a step back. He didn't move. Then he smiled. "You shouldn't have come here." Susan's body screamed at her to run. She lunged for the driver's door, yanked it open, and threw herself inside. She jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered. Didn't start. Her pulse pounded. She tried again. Nothing. Then, a knock on the window. Slow, deliberate. Susan turned her head. The man was standing inches away, still smiling. Her chest seized. Then he tilted his head like he was listening to something. And in the reflection of the car window, Daniel Price was standing right behind her, watching, waiting. Then the world glitched. The man vanished. Daniel's reflection vanished, and suddenly her car started. The engine roared to life. Susan didn't question it. She floored the gas pedal, tearing down the street, leaving the house, leaving them, leaving Fairview. At least, she thought she did. Until she reached the highway, and the road signs were all blank, like they had been wiped away, like the world itself was coming undone, like she was next. Susan gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. The road stretched endlessly ahead of her, bathed in the eerie glow of her headlights. No signs, no exits, just an empty highway that didn't exist. She had driven this route before. She should have passed towns, gas stations, mile markers, but there was nothing now, just a void of pavement surrounded by darkness. She glanced at her phone. No service. No time either. The digital clock on her dashboard had stopped. Her stomach churned. Had she really left Fairview? Or had she gone somewhere else? She pressed her foot on the gas, pushing the speedometer higher. The engine roared beneath her, the tires humming against the road. She just needed to keep moving. Then she saw it. Up ahead, standing in the middle of the highway. A figure. Small. Motionless. Daniel Price. Her heart slammed against her ribs. He was facing away, standing perfectly still, as if he had been waiting for her. Susan slammed the brakes. Her car skidded, tires screeching against the pavement as she jerked the wheel, barely stopping in time. The engine rumbled beneath her. Daniel didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, waiting. Susan's breath hitched. She reached for the door handle, her fingers trembling. She shouldn't do this. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to leave, but she couldn't, not anymore. She pushed the door open and stepped onto the road. The air was heavy. Wrong. It smelled empty, not like fresh air or asphalt, but like the absence of anything real. "Daniel?" she called softly. He didn't react. She stepped closer. His clothes were the same as the day he disappeared. Faded jeans, a striped blue t-shirt. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Daniel?" Slowly, his head tilted, not turning toward her, just slightly off angle, like he had heard her, but wasn't supposed to. Susan swallowed hard. "You have to tell me what's happening," she said. I think I'm disappearing too." A long silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice that sounded fractured, Daniel spoke. "They're taking you." Her chest tightened. "Who? The ones who erased me?" Susan's breath hitched. "The man in black?" she asked. "The woman at the library?" Daniel shook his head, his movements unnatural, like a glitching video. "No, they're just pieces. They're already gone." A shiver ran down her spine. "What are they?" Daniel's fingers twitched at his sides. "Not real anymore." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Not real. They weren't people, they were fragments, remnants. Was that what was happening to her? Daniel turned slightly, just enough for her to see his face. His eyes were empty. Not dead, not emotionless, just erased. Like reality had tried to wipe him away but hadn't fully succeeded. "You have to go back." Susan felt herself shudder. Back where? To where it started. Her stomach dropped. She knew what he meant. Daniel's house. Willow Lane. A chill crawled down her spine. She had just been there, had seen the house shift, change, like it was being rewritten in front of her. "You mean the house is—" Daniel's head snapped up. His expression shifted. Fear. Something was wrong. The air around them distorted. Then, a voice. Deep. Wrong. "You are not supposed to be here." Susan spun. A man stood at the edge of the road, tall, dressed in black, the same man she had seen outside her apartment, but this time his face was missing, just a smooth, featureless void where his eyes and mouth should have been. Susan took a step back. Daniel didn't move. The man's head tilted slightly. Then the sky shattered. For a brief second, Susan saw beyond it. The road, the sky, the stars. They weren't real, just a thin layer of reality stretched over something much darker. And that was when she realized she wasn't in Fairview anymore. She had never left. She had been inside something else, something that had been keeping her here. The man in black stepped forward. "It is time to forget." Susan's vision blurred. A force pressed against her mind, thick and heavy, like something was trying to push her out of existence. She fought. She clung to her thoughts, to Daniel's name, to her own name. The man stepped closer. Daniel suddenly grabbed her wrist. His fingers were cold. "Run," Susan gasped. And suddenly she was somewhere else. She was back in her car. The road was normal again. Streetlights, signs, the highway leading back into Fairview. She gasped for breath, gripping the wheel so hard her fingers ached. Had she imagined it? No. She could still feel Daniel's cold touch on her wrist. She looked at her phone. For the first time in hours, the clock was working again. The signal had returned, but there was one new message. She hesitated, then opened it. It was from an unknown number. You have one chance. Go back to Willow Lane. Finish it. Susan's stomach twisted. Daniel had said the same thing. Go back to where it started. She turned the car around. There was no escaping this. If she wanted answers, she had to face the truth. She had to return to Daniel's house one last time, and this time, she might not come back. The house that remembers Susan had never felt afraid of a house before, not until now. She stood at the end of Willow Lane, staring at the crumbling structure that had once been Daniel Price's childhood home. It was different this time. The house had shifted. It was still standing, but the details were wrong. The front door was slightly tilted, like it had been placed there by mistake. The windows were dark, but something behind the glass moved. The walls breathed. A cold weight settled in Susan's stomach. It wasn't a house anymore, it was a trap, and she had just stepped into it. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Another message. Go inside. Her hands trembled as she typed back, Who is this? 3 dots appeared. Someone was typing. Then the response. I still hear. Susan's breath hitched. Daniel! Her fingers hovered over the screen, but before she could reply, the front door creaked open. The house was waiting. The air inside was stale. Dust and mold clung to every surface, but beneath it, Susan smelled something else. Something that didn't belong in a house. Something like static. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. She took a step inside, the floor groaning beneath her weight. The walls seemed to pulse, as if the house itself was breathing in slow, heavy drags. Then a footstep, not hers, upstairs. Susan's throat tightened. She wasn't alone. She followed the sound, forcing herself to climb the staircase. It felt wrong, like she was walking deeper into something she couldn't leave. The walls flickered. The wallpaper peeled and repaired itself. The air smelled like burning paper. Then, at the top of the stairs, a door, Daniel's room. It stood slightly ajar, just like the last time she had been here. But this time she knew. Something was waiting for her inside. Susan hesitated at the threshold. She could hear breathing on the other side. Slow, shallow, like something was waiting. She reached for the door handle, and that's when she saw it. The notebook was on the floor, the one filled with Daniel's frantic handwriting. But now, only one sentence was scrawled over and over. You're not supposed to be here. Susan's chest tightened. She forced herself to open the door, and inside, she saw Daniel. He sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, rocking slightly. His skin was pale, stretched too thin over his small frame. His hair was matted, and his green eyes were unfocused, staring at something unseen. But the worst part? He was glitching, flickering in and out, like reality itself was struggling to hold on to him. Susan stepped forward, her voice hoarse. Daniel? His head lifted slightly, his lips parted. Then he spoke in 2 voices, his own and something else. You shouldn't have come here. Susan's body went cold. Daniel, what happened to you? She whispered. He stared at her, as if trying to remember. Then, slowly, he lifted a trembling hand and pointed behind her. Susan turned and saw the man in black. He stood in the doorway, tall and motionless. But this time, his face was back, a pale, featureless mask, something not human wearing the shape of one. You have gone too far. The room shuddered. The walls peeled away, revealing nothing but endless blackness beyond them. The house was coming apart. Susan staggered back. What do you want? The man tilted his head. To fix what you broke. A deep pressure settled over her, like something was pressing against her mind, trying to push her out of reality itself. She felt her thoughts unraveling, the memories slipping away, her name, her past, her own existence, the same way Daniel had been erased. She clenched her fists, fighting it. No, she gasped. I remember Daniel Price. The man in black stepped closer. Not for long. The room cracked apart. Daniel flickered violently, his form breaking and twisting. His lips moved soundlessly. Then the static screamed, a burst of light, then nothing. Susan woke up in her bed. Sunlight streamed through the window. The room was still, quiet. Her hands shook as she sat up. Had it been a dream? No. She could still feel the cold grip of Daniel's fingers on her wrist. She reached for her phone, checked the date. 2 days had passed. She had lost 48 hours. Her stomach lurched. She opened her messages and found only one from an unknown number. Do you remember him? She inhaled sharply. Her fingers trembled over the screen. Then, slowly, she typed back, yes. The reply came instantly. Then it's not over. Susan's chest tightened. She looked around her room. Everything was the same, except for one thing. On her desk lying open was Daniel's notebook. Her heart pounded. She reached for it, fingers trembling, and flipped to the last page. There, written in fresh ink, I'm still here. And beneath it, a single new sentence. So are you. The notebook sat open on her desk, its pages filled with Daniel's frantic handwriting. I'm still here. And beneath it, so are you. Susan's skin prickled. Her mouth was dry, her pulse hammering in her ears. The last time she had seen this notebook, it had been in Daniel's house. How was it here? She reached out hesitantly, brushing her fingers over the ink. It smudged, still fresh. Her breath caught. Someone or something had written this after she woke up. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Eric Calloway, her brother. She hit call. The phone rang once, twice, then a voice. But it wasn't Eric. You were supposed to forget? Susan's body froze. The voice was wrong, stretched, warped. It wasn't a person. It was something wearing a voice. Then the call cut out. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone. She had made a mistake. She had remembered, and now something else remembered her too. Susan needed answers. She needed to know if anyone else in Fairview still remembered Daniel Price. She left her apartment, stepping onto the street. The air was crisp, the sky dull and colorless, like someone had drained the warmth from the world. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her notes, reading over the list she had made before everything went wrong. Names of people who had seen the yearbook, people who had reacted to Daniel's picture. She started with Susan Raines, a classmate from Fairview High. Her number rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Hi, this is Susan. Leave a message. Susan Calloway hesitated. Then she spoke. Hi, it's me, Susan Calloway. I need to ask you something about Daniel Price. I think something's wrong. Please call me back. She hung up and dialed the next name on the list. Then the next, and the next. No one answered. One number had been disconnected. Another voicemail sounded wrong. A long, empty silence, followed by a faint, static-laced whisper. You are alone. Susan dropped the phone like it had burned her. Her stomach twisted. Everyone who had seen the yearbook was gone. She needed proof. If the town had been rewritten, if people were being erased, then there had to be some trace left. She turned onto Main Street, heading toward Fairview General Store. The store had security cameras. She had to check them. She pushed open the door, stepping inside. The shop was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights humming above the shelves. The cashier, an older woman with graying hair, looked up from the counter. Susan forced a smile. Hi, I was wondering if you have any security footage from outside, like from a few days ago? The woman's expression didn't change. She stared at Susan with blank, glassy eyes. Then, slowly, she said, What day is it? Susan felt her stomach drop. What? The woman blinked. Her movements were slow, wrong, like she was processing something that shouldn't be. There, what day is it? She repeated. Susan's mouth went dry. She turned, glancing at the small television screen in the corner of the shop displaying the live security feed. Then she stopped breathing. The screen showed the inside of the store. A live feed. But Susan wasn't in it. She was standing right there. She should have been on the screen, but there was nothing, just the empty store and the cashier. The older woman smiled, a wide, wrong smile. Then she whispered, "You're almost gone." Susan ran. She tore out of the store, her breath ragged, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. She had to get out. She had to leave Fairview before it was too late. She reached her car, fumbling with her keys, her hand shaking. She wrenched open the door and climbed inside, slamming it shut behind her. Then her phone rang. An unknown number. Her chest tightened. She didn't want to answer. She knew she shouldn't answer, but her fingers moved on their own, pressing the screen. She lifted the phone to her ear. Silence. Then a whisper. "Susan Calloway is gone." Her vision blurred. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. She was sitting in her car, wasn't she? Or was she standing on Willow Lane? Or inside the house? Her body felt detached, unstable, like she was flickering out. Then the whisper returned. "You should not exist." Susan's head throbbed. She gripped the steering wheel, forcing herself to breathe, to remember where she was. She had to focus. She wasn't gone. She wasn't. She clenched her jaw and spoke into the phone. "No, I'm still here." A pause. Then, for the first time, she heard something new. The whisper on the other end hesitated, and then a child's voice, soft, weak. "So am I." Susan's heart stopped. "Daniel?" Static roared in her ear, a deafening sound that rattled her skull. Then, silence. The call dropped. Susan sat in the driver's seat, her breath coming in shaky gasps. Daniel was still there, somewhere, and if he could still be saved, so could she. But only if she moved fast. She gripped the wheel, staring through the windshield at the empty road ahead. She had one last shot at stopping them, both. She slammed her foot on the gas. She was going back to where it all began. She was going back to Willow Lane, and this time, she was finishing it. The road to Willow Lane was emptier than before. No cars, no people, just silence. As Susan drove, the world around her felt less real. The buildings looked flattened, their details muted like unfinished sketches. The trees swayed in a wind she couldn't feel. The sky was a dull shade of gray, void of clouds, void of anything. It was as if the town was already disappearing. And soon she would too. She pulled up in front of Daniel's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her fingers ached. The house had changed. It no longer looked abandoned. The siding was new, the windows clean, the porch light on, like it had been reset. Like reality was trying to rewrite itself. But Susan knew better. She remembered. And that was what made her dangerous. She stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. The house watched her. She could feel it. A presence beneath the walls, inside the foundation, pressing against reality like something waiting to be let in. The front door swung open before she could touch it. The house was waiting. And this time, she was going inside for real. The stairs that don't end. The air inside was thick, heavy, charged with something unnatural. The layout had changed. The walls stretched taller, the rooms wider, like the house was growing around her. Susan stepped forward, her footsteps muffled against the softening carpet. It wasn't dust that covered the floor. It was ash. She swallowed hard. The staircase loomed ahead, impossibly long, more steps than should have been there. She placed her foot on the first one. It creaked. Then she climbed. Each step felt heavier, as if something was pushing her back down. The air smelled like old books and something burnt. Then, halfway up, she heard it. A familiar voice. "Susan." She froze. Daniel. It was coming from the top of the stairs. She ran. Her feet barely touched the ground as she reached the final step, bursting into Daniel's room. And there, he was waiting. Daniel sat in the corner, knees to his chest, staring at the wall. He was flickering, his body glitching in and out like static on an old TV. "You found me," he whispered. Susan's throat tightened. What happened to you? She asked. Daniel blinked slowly. Then they erased me, Susan shuddered. Who? The man in black? Daniel shook his head. No, the world did. She frowned. What? Daniel's body flickered violently. The room around them shuddered. They don't want to see us, Susan. The world doesn't want to remember. And when the world forgets you, his voice cracked, you stop existing. The words settled in her chest like ice. The erasure. It wasn't just people making them forget. It was reality itself. She stared at Daniel. The house trembled. The walls peeled back, revealing something beneath them. A void. A space where things go to be forgotten. And Daniel was slipping into it. I can't hold on much longer. Susan stepped forward. I won't let you disappear. His hollow green eyes met hers. Then you have to remember me. The world around them was coming apart. Susan could feel it. A force pulling her back. A force trying to make her forget. She clenched her fists. She had a choice. She could let go. She could allow reality to pull her back, to erase Daniel once and for all, to pretend he never existed. Or she could fight. She could hold on to his name, his story, his existence. She could keep him real. The floor beneath them cracked. Daniel's body was fading, his fingers barely visible now. Susan, she squeezed her eyes shut, and then she spoke his name. Loud, clear. Daniel Price exists. Reality shuddered. She felt something snap. The house screamed. A blinding light swallowed them whole. And then everything went black. Susan woke up on the sidewalk. The sun was shining. Birds chirped. Fairview was normal. She sat up slowly, her body aching. She turned to look at Daniel's house. It was gone. Not destroyed, not burned down, just gone, like it had never existed. Her heart pounded. Had she failed? Had she lost him? She stood up, brushing herself off, when she heard it, a small voice. Susan? She spun. And there, standing at the edge of the street, was Daniel. Alive? Whole? Real? I think you brought me back. Daniel Price was alive, real, solid, standing right in front of Susan on the sidewalk of Willow Lane. He blinked at her, confused, his green eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before. Recognition. I think you brought me back. Susan couldn't breathe. She had spent days unraveling the mystery of Daniel Price, chasing shadows, watching reality itself shift around her. And now, against all odds, she had won. You remember everything? She whispered. Daniel hesitated, his brows furrowed, his lips parting slightly. I remember disappearing. His voice was hoarse, quiet. I remember being stuck in nothing, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. Susan's stomach twisted. How long did it feel like you were gone? Daniel's expression darkened. Forever. A shiver crawled up her spine, but Daniel glanced around at the houses, at the familiar streets, at the sun casting golden light over Fairview. Everything looks the same. It did, but something felt off. Then a voice behind them. Daniel? They both turned. An older woman stood on the sidewalk, staring at Daniel with wide, wet eyes. Susan recognized her. Mrs. Wheeler. She had lived next door to the Price family for decades. Daniel hesitated. Mrs. Wheeler? The woman let out a choked sob, her hands covering her mouth. Oh my God, Daniel, we thought you were dead. Susan felt a strange unease settle over her. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I was missing. Mrs. Wheeler shook her head. No, honey, not missing. You were in a coma. Susan's breath hitched. What? Daniel asked. The woman nodded rapidly, smiling through her tears. Oh, it was terrible. You were in a car accident, Daniel. You hit your head. The doctor said you might not wake up, but here you are. Daniel froze, his fingers twitched at his sides. That's not what happened, he whispered. Mrs. Wheeler frowned. Of course it is, sweetheart. Everyone knows. The whole town prayed for you. Susan felt her pulse spike. This wasn't right. Daniel had disappeared. There had been police searches, missing person posters. The entire town had mourned him, not a coma. She stepped forward. Mrs. Wheeler, that's not. Oh, and your parents will be so happy, the woman beamed. They moved away after the accident, but I'm sure they'll come right back when they hear you woke up. Daniel's face drained of color. No, he whispered. They moved away because I disappeared, because they lost me. Mrs. Wheeler didn't seem to hear him. You're so lucky, sweetheart. Some people never wake up from something like that. Susan grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him back. Daniel, we need to go. But now, the moment they turned, Susan caught movement in her peripheral vision. Across the street, a man in a dark coat stood motionless, staring at them, watching. She recognized him immediately. The man in black. Her stomach lurched. She pulled Daniel toward her car. Get in. Susan, what's going on? She didn't answer. She couldn't, because she finally understood. Daniel hadn't just come back. The world had been rewritten to make sense of it. The people of Fairview hadn't forgotten him. They had just been given a new version of the truth, one that fit, one that didn't break reality, one that erased the fact that Daniel had ever been erased. And if that was true, then Susan was the only one who still knew the real story, which meant she was next. The car ride was silent. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his jaw clenched. Susan could feel the questions building inside him. She could feel something else too, the presence, watching, waiting. She wasn't supposed to be here. The universe had already corrected its mistake. Daniel Price was back. So why was she still remembering? Why wasn't she rewritten too? Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. She checked the rearview mirror. And her heart stopped. The man in black was there, sitting in the back seat. Daniel didn't see him. Susan's fingers clenched around the wheel so hard, they ached. She couldn't react, couldn't let Daniel see, but she could feel it. The weight of unreal eyes boring into her, the static in the air, the way reality itself hummed like a distant radio signal. You do not belong, the man whispered. The words weren't spoken. They slipped into her mind like an echo. Susan kept her eyes forward. She couldn't acknowledge him. She couldn't show fear. You broke the cycle. Her vision blurred. Daniel shifted beside her. Susan? Her voice barely came out. What? Where are we going? She swallowed hard. Somewhere safe? The moment they reached Susan's apartment, she slammed the car into park and bolted for the door, dragging Daniel with her. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped her keys. She fumbled with the lock and felt a breath on the back of her neck. You cannot hide. She shoved Daniel inside, slammed the door, and locked it. The apartment was silent. Still, Daniel turned to her. Susan, tell me the truth. She met his eyes. The weight of everything settled onto her shoulders. The erased memories, the rewritten truth, the thing that had been following her, waiting for her to disappear. She took a slow breath. Daniel, you didn't wake up from a coma. His face paled. You vanished. No one could find you. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. And I don't think I brought you back. His expression twisted. Then what did? She swallowed. I think the world did. Silence. Daniel sat down heavily, pressing a hand to his temple. Then why do you remember the truth? He whispered. Susan's stomach turned. She didn't know. The world had rewritten itself to keep Daniel, but it hadn't rewritten her, and that could only mean one thing. She was never meant to stay. She had broken something she wasn't supposed to. She had forced reality to notice her, and now it was fixing its mistake. A single thought pressed against the back of her mind, cold and final. She wasn't supposed to exist anymore, and soon she wouldn't. Susan Calloway was disappearing. She could feel it happening, like her mind was fading at the edges, like the world was slowly forgetting she existed. Daniel sat across from her in her apartment, staring at her with wide, uncertain eyes. I don't understand, he whispered. Susan swallowed hard. Reality fixed itself when I brought you back. It rewrote everything to make you fit. But it didn't rewrite me. Daniel shook his head. But why? Susan exhaled slowly. Because I wasn't supposed to survive. The words sat heavy in the air. Daniel's face paled. Then, how do we stop it? Susan's pulse thundered. She didn't have much time. Already the world around her was glitching. The walls flickered. Her reflection in the window lagged behind her movements. She wasn't just being erased. She was falling out of reality itself. She stood up. There's only one way to stop this. Daniel's jaw tightened. Tell me. Susan knew what was coming. She had seen it happen to Daniel. She had seen the man in black erase others. She had felt reality push her away, force her into the cracks of existence where no one could find her. But she had one advantage. She remembered. And that meant she still had a choice. She turned to Daniel, hands trembling. Listen to me. If I start to disappear, if I start to slip away, you can't let them erase me. Daniel stiffened. How? Susan reached for a pen and grabbed his hand. She pressed the pen against his palm, forcing him to write. Susan Calloway lists. Keep writing it, she whispered. Over and over. If they take me, you have to hold on to my name. Daniel nodded. Then the room shook. The lights flickered violently. A deep, suffocating hum filled the air, vibrating against Susan's skull. They're here, Daniel gasped. Susan turned. The man in black stood in the corner. But he wasn't alone. Others stood with him now, figures with smooth, featureless faces. Men, women, all dressed in black, all watching. The air warped, reality bent inward, and Susan felt herself slipping. You were not meant to stay, the man in black whispered. The floor beneath her cracked open. A deep, endless void stretched below. It was pulling her in, like a black hole, like a place where things went when they were forgotten. No! Daniel grabbed her wrist. Susan's body flickered. Her hand went transparent. She was losing. The world was winning. The erasure was taking her. Daniel? Her voice warped. Daniel's grip tightened. He refused to let go. I remember you, he screamed. The void shuddered. The world glitched. The figures in black twitched violently. Then something broke. A piercing, fractured screech filled the room. And then, suddenly, the darkness collapsed. The man in black staggered, his smooth, empty face cracked down the center. The other figures began to fade. And Susan, she was still here. Still real, still remembered. Daniel's fingers dug into her wrist, his breath ragged. The world was stabilizing. She hadn't been erased. She had won. The figures in black vanished. The air went still. And then everything went quiet. The next morning, Fairview was normal. No flickering buildings. No missing people. No signs of the horrors that had happened. But Susan remembered, and so did Daniel. They sat on the edge of a park bench, watching the sun rise over the town. It's over, Daniel whispered. Susan let out a shaky breath. I don't think it's ever really over. Daniel turned to her. Do you think they'll come back? Susan didn't answer right away. She reached into her bag, pulling out the notebook. The same notebook that had been in his house. The pages were blank now, but she knew what it had once said. I'm still here. She took a deep breath, then pulled out a pen. She wrote, Daniel Price leased. Susan Calloway leased. Daniel watched in silence. She met his gaze. They don't win unless we forget. He nodded slowly. The sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the town in golden light. The world had tried to erase them, but they were still here, and as long as they remembered, they always would be. Susan Calloway sat alone in a white room. A single, flickering fluorescent light buzzed above her, casting a dull glow over the cracked tile floor. The notebook rested in her lap, its pages covered in frantic, looping handwriting. Daniel Price. Price. Susan Calloway, live. They erased him. They're coming for me. Her hands trembled as she traced over the words again and again. A voice crackled through the intercom. The Mason, she's doing it again! Susan flinched. The door creaked open. A man in a white coat stepped inside, clipboard in hand. His voice was careful, measured. Susan. She didn't answer. He sighed, pulling a chair across from her and sitting down. We've been over this before. Daniel Price never existed. Susan stiffened. That's not true. The doctor flipped through the clipboard. You were found in an abandoned house on Willow Lane, writing on the walls, talking to someone who wasn't there. Susan shook her head. I saved him. The doctor sighed. Susan, listen to me. She slammed the notebook shut. You're lying. The doctor didn't react. Susan, there was never a Daniel Price. There was never a man in black. This story you've created, it's your mind's way of coping, but it isn't real. Susan's breath hitched, her pulse pounded in her ears. You saw his name. The doctor's expression didn't change. There was no yearbook. Susan's vision blurred. She remembered. The house, the search, the figures in black, the way the world had tried to erase them both. But the longer she sat there, the more distant those memories became, like a dream slipping through her fingers, like something she had made up. The doctor's voice softened. Susan, your mind has created a narrative to explain something that doesn't exist. But deep down, you know the truth. She swallowed. What truth? The doctor leaned forward. Daniel Price was never real. The words hit like a hammer. Her stomach twisted. The notebook in her lap suddenly felt lighter. She opened it, and the pages were blank. She flipped through them, faster, desperate. No words, no proof, no Daniel, just emptiness. A sob built in her throat. The doctor gave her a sad, knowing look. It's time to let him go, Susan. She shook her head. No, I remember. But her voice faltered because she couldn't remember anymore. She could feel the story unraveling in her mind, the timelines, the conversations, the fear. It was all slipping away, like a fading nightmare, like something that had never been real. Tears burned her eyes. Please, she whispered. The doctor reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's over, Susan. She let out a shaky breath, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if he was wrong. What do you think really happened to Daniel Price? Was he erased, or was he never there to begin with? Let us know in the comments below, and if you love unraveling eerie mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because some stories, they don't want to be remembered. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and as always, watch your back.